Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear students, welcome back to our sessions with the subject Human Resource Management. Today's topic is about personal planning and recruiting. And before we start, we need to discuss first the first issue regarding selecting employees in a company. And of course, as you said before, selecting the employee is actually a very important issue for companies because the employee is the part of the business that actually achieves the strategies and the goals of the company. Without such kind of proper selection methods, this kind of procedure will cost the company a lot of money in terms of training, and also strategies may not really be achieved in a good way. So we will have the following items, inshallah. These are the objectives of today's lesson. First, we will explain the main techniques used in employment planning and forecasting. We will also list and discuss the main outside sources of candidates. Also, effectively recruit job candidates. Another objective here is to name and describe the main internal sources of candidates, and also develop a help wanted ad. And finally, we will explain how to recruit a more diverse workforce. And accordingly, we will have the following points to discuss: employment planning and forecasting techniques, the outside sources of candidates, the recruiting process. We will also talk about the internal sources of candidates, and finally we will discuss recruitment of diverse workforce. Now, as an introduction here, there are some points we need to discuss and consider before selecting or before we initiate the process of selection. For example, we need to decide what positions to fill through personnel planning and forecasting. Now, when we talk about positions, we're talking about duties, tasks, relations, responsibilities, and the sum of such kind of activities is actually what we need to achieve a given job. So this is only handled by the job analysis we have discussed before. And then we need to build a pool of candidates for these jobs, because the more candidates we have, the better we can select. So this will be by recruiting internal or external candidates. We also have candidates complete application forms, which is a form of procedures. We use selection tools such as a test, background investigations, or physical exams to identify suitable candidates. And we also need to decide who to make an offer to, and by having the supervisor and perhaps others interview the candidates. And here we refer to supervisors, and some companies might also use peer workers, for example, from the same department, interviewing the newcomers or the candidates. According to this, we will first discuss the steps in the recruitment and selection process. You look here at this point, we have to plan and forecast the employment. Now, this will be done according to the need of the company regarding the jobs designed by the company itself. So the first step is actually planning and forecasting the number of employees. And once this is done, we will start recruiting the candidates. Recruiting is a process in which we try to attract and gather as many candidates as we can, providing that those candidates have special kind of expertise, experiences, qualifications, according to the job analysis outcome we have already discussed before. So recruiting or building a pool of candidates, which is the second step here. Now, candidates will go through all these procedures. For example, here, applicants complete application forms. Then we use the selection tools like test to screen out most applicants. Now, we have different candidates applying for a job. We need to have a given a special tool that can help the employees, the recruiters, to select among the best kind of candidates. So that's why we will talk about the tools or the selection tools. And the last point here is about supervisors and other interview final candidates to make final choice. Now, after we have the short list from the second step, now we have the interview. So finally, the candidates become employee. So this is like a step, but we need to discuss, we need to say that such kind of procedures are not necessarily the same in all companies. So practically, they can be the same in terms of the need to handle these issues. However, when we talk about companies, especially large establishment, large companies, sometimes they require different testing. They also emphasize on different interviews at different levels. So this actually has got something to do with the sensitivity of the job being applied for, besides the way the top management looks at such kind of procedures. So that's why we have sometimes such kind of variances in terms of these kind of procedures. However, in general, the recruitment and selection process usually starts with planning and goes through certain kind of procedures until we get the right candidates. Now here, last time we talked about job analysis and then designing the job based on the needs of the company regarding its strategies, the company's corporate objectives. Today, we're talking about selection. However, we still need to link the employees who is applying for the job through the procedures adopted by the human resource management to the strategies of the company. So by this, we can make sure that the one we select can help the company achieve its own corporate or its own objectives. And that is through the following. Okay, you can see here the employer's strategy to plans, linking the employer's strategy. Now when we talk about the employers, we're talking about the company itself. This is the top management. So let's assume that these are the company's objectives. For example, diversity, or integrate vertically, expand geographically. So these are all examples of company's objectives, which can also be different from one to another. However, we are a lot more concerned on how to link such kind of strategies with the selected employee. So the point is here, because we're talking about human resource management, human resource plans will be discussed. So human resource plans will actually be linked to the kind of strategies. According to the need by the company, they will set the plans that can support such kind of strategies. And this one requires the following. They have personal plans, training, compensation, labor relations, and security and safety plans. So the first topic here, we will talk about the personal plans. Personnel plans is actually planning the employees that will come as candidates and trying to select among the best candidates applying for a job. So by this, we can make sure that those who are accepted can handle the strategies set by the company itself. Okay? So procedures that can help doing that is an accurate job analysis, a thorough job description and specification, and then here a good selection method. So we have personnel forecast, recruitment plans, and employee selection plans. So by this, we can double check, we can make sure that the one that is selected by the company is actually supporting the companies in the long run. Now we start with planning and forecasting. The first one here, we said employment, or referred to as personnel planning. As a definition, it's a process of deciding what positions the firm will have to fill and how to fill them. Now so far we're talking about the jobs. So that's why we refer to it as employment. So we're talking about different types of positions that the company would like to have and the process of filling such kind of positions. Another issue here is called the succession planning. Now when we talk about succession planning, we always refer to top management or managerial kind of selection and training. So here, it's a process of deciding how to fill the company's most important executive jobs. And this is one of the requirements for companies to start their businesses in some countries. For example, some countries might emphasize in this point to make sure that companies, especially public companies, have succession planning in their own plans. So this to make sure, especially if the company is about investing in the market. So if the company trades off shares to public, the government would like to make sure that this kind of business will carry on its own business for the long run because they have proper succession planning. Should one of the top management leave the company, they will be a replacement in the company itself. So that is why this kind of plan or plans is very important for companies, especially the big ones. So again, succession planning is more about top management kind of selection and also training. So that's why we talk about executive jobs. And then we have what to forecast here, talking about forecasting. So for example, we need to plan ahead the overall personnel needs. Now, we cannot tell about the personnel needs unless we know the strategies of the company. So that's why we have to link the strategies and the procedures of human resource management regarding this issue. Also the supply of inside candidates and the supply of outside candidates. Now we have to forecast the needs, and according to the needed number of employees based on the requirements of the strategies, we may have two different options. Either supply of inside candidates or, if not possible, the supply of outside candidates. So we might get employees from inside the company already hired, or we might head for external candidates. Now, how do we forecast personnel needs? We have different tools to do that. As you can see here, forecasting tools. For example, trend analysis, ratio analysis, and scatter plotting. Now, remember, we're talking here about tools. So, using such kind of tools can enable the company to figure out about the right number of employees in a given department or in general. So, for example, here, looking at this, we have hospital size and we have number of registered nurses. So the number of nurses here are actually the number of employees in a given industry. This is a hospital, so they need number of nurses to, like doctors. Here the nurses take care of patients, but the question is, how can we tell about the right number of nurses this hospital needs? So in a way to forecast the personnel needs regarding such kind of services, they consider the following: the hospital size, the number of beds, and accordingly, based on this, we have the number of nurses. For example, here we have the size of hospital number, like 200 beds requires 240 nurses. If the hospital expands its business because of the high demand of this health services, or because of the great impact of quality in such kind of industries here, so it is expected that a lot of patients will head to such good places for such services. So 300 beds in a hospital requires 260 nurses. And as we go more here, 400, 470. So plotting this in a trend can help the company decide the number of nurses. So we're talking about employees here. So as we have number of beds here, we will have the number of nurses. So this is one way to handle this issue, but again, different companies might also use different tools, because the kind of tools that is right for this hospital may not be necessarily right for another industries, like for example a manufacturing industry or universities, for example. So that is why there will be some kind of varieties of tools, differences in tools using to estimate and forecast the personal needs. And of course, other issues that companies usually use is considering past projections of sales, for example, the opportunities in the market, the blooming here, sometimes it's more about economic status of the market where they operate. So there would be a lot of issues to consider when they talk about personal needs. However, talking about the tools used here, we will refer to the following tools as among the most important tools that can be used by companies. But again, these kind of tools can vary from one business to another. Now, talking about these kind of tools and selection methods and the techniques adopted by companies, we might also need to discuss some of the drawbacks. Now, when we talk about traditional forecasting techniques, sometimes some problems might pop up. For example, they may focus on projected sale volume and historical sales. And this is what most of the companies actually do, assuming that the firm's existing structure and activities will continue. But that is not necessarily right. So sometimes it goes like that. Sometimes we may have like economic recession, new entrance of competitors. So such factors can somehow affect such projections. And this is one of the problems and drawbacks of adopting traditional forecasting techniques. Besides, they generally do not consider the impact the company's strategic initiatives may have in future staffing levels. And this is one issue, a problem, which has a dramatic impact on the quality and the quantity of the number being selected. They support outdated compensation plans that reward managers for managing ever larger staffs. Now, this problem is actually very serious here because, as I said before, the number of employees selected in a job should fit the right strategies or should fit the strategies adopted by the companies, because at the end, the employees being selected will be considered as fixed cost. So if there's no need for such kind of selection, the company, of course, will lose a lot of money for nothing. So that is why this is one of the issues regarding traditional forecasting techniques. Finally, they tend to support the non-productive idea that increases in staff are inevitable. But this is not right. Nowadays, we always hear about downsizing forced work, sometimes delayering companies, turning companies from long to flat kind of hierarchy. So this is one of the misconceptions about the idea of productivity regarding the traditional forecasting techniques. And these are all drawbacks or shortcomings about traditional forecasting techniques. Now, using computers to forecast personnel requirements, here the computerized forecast. Some companies, as you said before, might adopt different tools in doing this kind of process. So software that estimates future staffing needs by creating metrics for direct labor hours and 3 sales projection scenarios, like, for example, minimum, maximum, and probable. Projecting sales volume of production and personnel required to maintain different volumes of output. Now, we have given figures, and accordingly, the program or the system will come up with the right projected number of employees according to such kind of figures. So that's why we call it computerized forecast. And finally, forecasting staffing levels for direct labor and indirect staff and exempt staff as well. And this kind of staffing might be good if the kind of business scenarios or if the output of the company itself is somehow the same in different levels or in different period of times. So this can help. Talking about the environment where the business operates, the environment will be static, not dynamic. And if the environment is static, this kind of forecasting tool can also help. Now, how about the supplying of inside candidates as a source of employees, potential employees? We said before that companies can use two different sources of candidates. Either the already hired employees in the company, or they might use different sources from outside the boundaries of the business. So we start with the inside candidates. So we call this one qualification inventories. It's just like an inventory in which you select the right candidates. A good thing about this process is that you already know the employees. Employees are already trained, can be well motivated, and they already know about the policies, the structure of the company, procedures, etc., beside the culture. So here we have the manual system and replacement charts and the computerized information system. Now, these are examples of inventories that the company used to supply candidates from inside the business. Now, effective recruitment here, as you can see, advantages of centralizing recruitment. It facilitates applying strategic priorities. This is one very important issue about centralizing recruitment. Strengthens employment brand, reduces duplications of human resource activities, spreads the cost of new human resource technologies. Now, talking about the cost, okay, it's a good way to spread the cost of new human resource technology among different, of course, departments. Builds teams of human resource experts, provides better measurement of human resource performance, and of course allows for sharing of applicant pools. You can imagine that companies adopting such kind of system, sharing such kind of good information with different branches, plans. So this will help selecting the right employees, transferring information that they need among these kind of plans. So here, if the firm's divisions here are autonomous here, which is more independent, or their recruitment needs are varied, it may be more sensible to decentralize the recruitment function. For example, if you have a company that operates in different countries, one of these countries is India. Now, the recruitment procedure would be totally different from that in Europe or in Canada. Requirements of selection, employees selection, can be different because of culture, the law itself, okay? Such kind of requirements in every different country might also affect the human resource ways of selection. Besides, the sensitivity of the market where the business operates can also have an impact on these issues. So sometimes the company might think of decentralizing, which is these plans can use or can come up with the right decision based on the requirement of the environment in this place. While other plans of the same company in different countries may use centralized should such kind of environment is somehow matching or similar. So this is something that the company can decide accordingly. Now, how to measure the recruiting effectiveness? We can see here what to measure and how to measure in order to answer such kind of question. So let's talk about devices here. For example, as you can see, selection device and the validity for predicting job performance. So if the first method, for example, is work sample tests, the validity of such kind of test is 0.54. Another kind of tools used here as a selection device among the tools used here is job knowledge tests. Validity will be 48. Structured interview 51. Biographical data 35. Grade point average using most American based universities in the Arab region, for example, 23.23. Another one is rating for training and experience is 0.11. As you can see here, the most valid type of test is actually the work sample test. The reason here, or if we say why, because this directly tests the kind of behavior that should be done in a company. Meaning, the candidate should apply some kind of practices in order to exhibit the behavior that he or she can perform in an environment or in a given job. So by this we can match his or her capability to the required job description, job tasks, for example, or duties. So this is quite reliable and valid kind of test than the others. But that does not mean we can't use other tools like the knowledge test, which is informative, or the structured interviews. This can also help to provide predictors on how somebody will work in the future. So here, of course, the higher is better. Now, the recruitment yield pyramid, of course, as company starts with the procedure of selection, they try to generate a huge pool of candidates so that they can select among the best kind of candidates. So the bigger, the better, of course. But of course, this can also cost more. However, this shouldn't be part of the consideration of the company in the long run, because we're talking about the job that should be handled in a way to achieve the strategy. So here, for example, at the bottom of this pyramid, the leads generated, for example, 1,200 candidates at the very beginning, so which is 6 to 1. 6 to 1 means among those candidates applying for the job, only 200 will be accepted to the next step. Okay, so candidates will be invited. So among those 1,200 employees, CVs, for example, the resumes will be, for example, studied to select the right employees for the interviews. So now we have 200 candidates. We will have 3 to 4, which is 150 employees to be interviewed. Now this process is just like cutting from the number of candidates applying for the job through the procedures themselves. So as we go up here, up the pyramid, we somehow try to shortlist the number of candidates as to the right candidates applying for the job, to the best kind of employees, potential employees in the future. The only thing that can help us here is the job description and the job specification that we have developed before. Now we have 150, there will be 100, the offers made, 2 to 1, and then 50, the new hires, the last one. So this is just an example on how the recruiting yield pyramid can go. Okay, of course, in some companies, they can start with like 20 employees here. In some other companies, can be like 10,000 employees. If we're talking about specific number of employees or candidates to be accepted. So the number in this pyramid, of course, varies according to the need of the company itself. Now the advantages here. Talking about the internal candidates, we have a lot of good advantages. For example, the full knowledge of candidates' strengths and weaknesses. The company already knows about those candidates. Besides, it's a more accurate view of candidates' skills because of such kind of knowledge. Candidates have a stronger commitment to the company. They've been working in a company for a while, and they can be subject to different training programs. Besides, commitment of such kind of employees will also be promoted because of such kind of selection for higher position. Increases employee morale among the employees. The less training and orientation required here. We don't need orientation training because those employees have already been working with the company itself. And family business successions promote continuity. Okay, so if you're talking about the career as a behavior and the retention in a company, selecting among the candidates from inside the company itself can promote such kind of issue. However, we have some disadvantages here. For example, failed applicants become disconnected. Now, this will be like a disappointment, especially if considering the other employees around. Time wasted interviewing inside candidates who will not be considered. Okay? Sometimes companies might have to interview a lot of employees inside the company so that to convey a message of fairness. In the Arab world, only 50% of the 80% of family businesses have succession plans. And this is a serious issue. As you said before, talking about the family business, if you consider the executive members are from the family members here, and they don't have succession plans or no training is designed for such kind of employees or members in the long run, this will inevitably affect the business performance in the future, which might be a reason why businesses collapse in some, especially in the Gulf country. Now, how do we find internal candidates? Of course, hiring from within is a process. For example, rehiring former employees who have already left the company itself. Job posting in a company bulletin, for example, or intranet used by the company itself. And succession planning by a human resource information system, which is an inventory system designed by the company itself, which includes information about potential employees to hold high-ranking positions. Now, the human resource information system is a software in which data includes information about employee skills and qualifications. So, it's a source of data that the company can use whenever they want to select from inside the boundary of the business. Besides, it is useful in facilitating the succession planning, which if combined with career development, succession planning can allow companies to build a talent pool. Now, remember, in this point, we're talking about high positions in a company, succession planning. So the more data we have, gather, for example, the company in such kind of systems, the better the selection will be. Besides, company can also decide on the right training programs. Now, the outside sources of candidate, the second point here, locating outside candidates, we have different sources. Talking about the outside candidates, which can be a better source of selecting, especially if you're talking about rare kind of expertise that the company would like to get. So, for example, recruiting via the internet, advertising, employment agencies, which are used a lot in places like United States of America, Australia. So there are special kind of agencies whose job is to supply labor. And this has already been done in some Arab countries. In Yemen, for example, we have HR, which is a website that can help companies provide better kind of chances to select good employees. Also, we have offshoring, outsourcing, executive recruiters, on-demand recruiting services, and college recruiting, which is one possibility of going to the place where we can have candidates, which is, it can be universities, academic institutions, or the places where candidates usually are located. And finally, referrals and walk-ins. The walk-ins. Referral can be either by people outside the business itself, or within the same industries, or sometimes can be within the company, members inside the company itself, who may recommend employees. Now, recruiting via the internet, which is a modern way or can be a good source, quite comprehensive. We have advantages here. It is one good way to publicize job openings. Besides, it costs less than the ordinary ways of doing that. More applicants are attracted over a longer period. It's a very comprehensive way of publicizing job openings. Besides, it's an immediate applicant responses, has immediate applicant responses. Instantaneous kind of technology can help such kind of fast communication. Online pre-screening of applicants, which also helps a lot. Links to other job search sites. Automation of applicant tracking and evaluation is another issue, is another privilege, if I can say, adopting such kind of technology. However, some disadvantages here. The executive number of unqualified applicants, excessive number of unqualified applicants. At the end, you cannot tell that those people applying through the internet are actually matching the requirement of the job. That's why we have different tests, so that we can shortlist the number of applicants. Besides, personal information privacy concerns of applicants. And this issue is quite crucial in places like Europe. But in some countries, it becomes like a culture, and sometimes they post this one besides the ad in the internet, that information needed will be about the following. So in a way to avoid any kind of violation for personal information privacy. Advertising for outside candidates, for example, the media choice. This is about the selection of best medium depends on the positions for which the firm is recruiting. We said before that we have different levels at the organization, and each level we might need some kind of new applicants. So according to the sensitivity of the position the company is trying to get employees, they might select the kind of media or the kind of source. So that is position. For example here, newspapers, local and specific labor markets, trade and professional journals, specialized employees, which is one good source here. The internet job sites, a global labor or global labor markets. Now this can help especially for international businesses or joint ventures in different countries, different geographic area. Effective advertisements creates attention, interest, desire, and action. Now these are main principles or standards so that we have effective advertisements. So what's an effective advertisement? Actually, the main purpose of advertisements here is to attract the best kind of candidates, or the candidates whom we think are actually qualified enough to be selected for a job. So in a way to do that, we need to design advertisements. In order for the advertisements to do the job, it must be effective through such kind of standards. For example, it must be a little bit different from the advertisements of the competitors. So that's why we create attention to stand out among the other similar advertisements. If it does, it will bring interest to those candidates, especially high qualified ones. This will lead them to desire to apply for the job and will affect their behavior, will come, okay, to apply for the job. Finally here we create a positive impression of the firm. Okay? The more effective advertisements, the better we can select. So this will help add to the value of the business itself. We also have employment agencies which can help supply labor for companies. Of course, type of employment agency can be either private, temporary, or executive recruiters. Now, private is a kind of business whose job is to supply labor for companies. Temporary is actually based on contract in which such kind of agencies are supposed to supply given types or specific type of jobs to the company itself. We have also special kind of agencies whose job is only about executive recruiters or executive positions. Now, these are examples of agencies. Now, the question is, why do we use private employment agency? Why not relying on the company itself? There are some reasons why we do that. For example, maybe the company itself lacks recruiting and screening capabilities, and accordingly, those employees selected by the company will not be appropriate in terms of their expertise. So that is why one way out is actually to use private employment agency. Another one is to attract a pool of qualified applicants to fill a particular opening quickly, because those are more experienced in doing that. To attract a greater number of applicants, to reach currently employed individuals who are more comfortable dealing with agencies. Now, if you're talking about high experienced employees who are already hired by competitors or who already work in other companies, the process of attracting them by the company itself, so that is why using private employment agency can help, especially if we're talking about certain kind of expertise. Besides, to reduce internal time devoted to recruiting. So these are examples of advantages of private employment agency. Now here, problems with employment agencies, on the other hand, provide the agency with accurate and complete job description is very important, without which selection may not be appropriate. Maybe the private employment agency is good enough to select, but without the document that can help them select, they will not do the job in a good way. We also need to make sure that tests, application blanks, and interviews are part of the agency's selection process. So there will be a variety of selection tools used by such kind of agency. They do not rely on just one tool. Screen agency for effectiveness in filling positions is very important. And also supplement the agency's reference checking by recruiting company itself checking the final candidate's references. This is one way to double check on the procedure used by the company itself. So the company should also follow on the procedures by the agency. Now the temporary agencies here, benefits for example, of course here, one good benefit is that they increase productivity, which means that they're only paid when working. It allows trial run for prospective employees. Besides, no recruitment, screening, and payroll administration costs. This is not something that the company does on its own. Someone else does it, which is the temporary agency. However, the cost here, increased labor costs due to fees paid to temporary agencies. Besides, the temporary employees' lack of commitment to the firm. Now, this can also be seen if you're talking about special projects in given places, a project that only lasts for 2 years or 6-month kind of projects where employees work there based on contract. So talking about such kind of businesses, the commitment will not be as that of a permanent job, of course. Then we have offshoring, outsourcing, or the white collar and other jobs. So main issues to consider, of course, the political and military instability in these places. Now we're talking about having employees coming from different countries or vice versa. Culture misunderstandings, customer security and privacy concerns So this varies among the borders of countries, of course, and foreign contracts, liability and legal concerns, and finally, in other words, it focuses on core competencies than it does with other issues. So these are issues we have to think about when we talk about offshoring and outsourcing white collar. And when we talk about white collar, we're talking about top management kind of jobs, or the kind of jobs that work within the boundary of the business, especially in the admin work. Now the outside sources of candidates here: executive recruiting, headhunters, agencies. Now when we talk about executive recruiters, we target the top or high ranking positions in the company. We might also target those already employed in similar businesses. So that is why this is a very sensitive issue, but because of the need of such kind of expertise, it is really worth. So here, internet technology and specialization trends, guidelines for choosing a recruiter. Of course, we need to make sure that the firm is capable of conducting a thorough search. Remember, we're not talking about ordinary employees, we're talking about executives. So more information is actually needed. Meet the individual who will handle the assignment. Ask how much the search firm charges, because this can cost a lot. And besides, we should never rely solely on the recruiter to do all the reference checking, because people being accepted in this job will be in the top management of the company itself. So their decisions might dramatically affect the business, either positively, which is needed, or negatively. So on-demand recruiting services, it's about short-term specialized recruiting. This is paid by the hour or project, of course, because it is on demand. It's not a permanent kind of service. Handles recruiting, analysis, and pre-screening. We have also the location of the applicants itself, which we refer to as college recruiting. Here, the company goes to the places where it can find potential candidates. So we refer to it as on-campus recruiting goals. Okay? So the goals here we have to handle is to determine if the candidate is actually worth or worthy for further consideration, to attract good candidates, especially fresh ones with the kind of power and eagerness to work in businesses as they want to bridge the sciences that they've been studying with the real world. Now, on-site visits, which is another source of external. Now, when we talk about the internet, for example, invitation letters, on-site visits here, assigned hosts, information packages, planned interviews, and of course, timely employment offer. These are issues we can find in these kind of sites that offers such kind of opportunities or job opportunities. The internships is another way also to get sources. This can be done by companies. They target students graduating from universities, for example, or sometimes other people from different institutions. So that is why we call it win-win situation. So those people learn from the business, and at the same time, the business utilizes their own expertise or dexterities and skills. So it's a win-win situation for students and the employer. Now the last point here in today's session will be about the diverse workforce. So what do we mean by diverse workforce? We have minorities, for example, and women, older workers, expatriates, and these issues can be among the issues we have to consider when hiring employees. Now, developing and using application forms as follows. So, uses of application information. Remember, this is the kind of information we would like to have in order to take the right decision. For example, the applicant's education and experiences. Now, this is one of the information that the applicant has to fill or to supply, okay, to offer for the position before initiating the process itself, applicant's progress and growth, the applicant's employment stability, and of course the applicant's likelihood of success. Now, such kind of information is of great importance, paramount importance for companies to use later. So by this, dear students, we come to the end of our session today. We discussed the following points here. We discussed the main techniques used in employment planning and forecasting. We also discussed the outside sources of candidates, which can be a lot. However, as we said before, companies can choose among the kind of sources that really fit with the environment where they work. Ways used to effectively recruit job candidates. We also discussed things about the internal sources of candidates. And we talked about a help wanted ad, which is advertisements, effective advertisements, and recruiting diverse workforce. So according to this, we come to the end. You will have an attachment together with the session, which is attachment number 4. By this, dear students, we come to the end of our session. Thank you very much for listening attentively. I wish you all the best, inshallah, and see you in the next session. Wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.